Okay, welcome to another edition of Ozarks Voices, an oral history project of the Missouri State University Libraries. My name is Tom Peters. I'm the Dean of Libraries. Today's date is July 13th, Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. And our special guest today is Wes Pratt. Wes, thanks very much.
Thank you for the invitation to participate.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but is your current official title Chief Diversity Officer of the university?
Yes, it's Assistant to the President, Chief Diversity Officer.
Okay. Yeah. And you are about to retire at the end of the month?
August 1st.
1st of August.
August 1st.
I know there's a reason why that's always the case. Where
Sure.
Something to do with benefits and whatnot. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You are an Ozark, or born and raised?
Well, I was actually born in Los Angeles.
Really?
But my mother had gone back to visit her brothers, and she was pregnant with me and gave birth in Los Angeles. And so approximately 6 months after I was born, I was brought back to Springfield, Missouri. So I grew up here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you care to say when you were born?
Oh, December 31st, 1950, as a matter of fact, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
December 31st.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, tax deduction.
I was going to say that your
Just got under
your
the
parents were
wire.
probably happy that you were born on December 31st. 1950. Okay, so you grew up in Springfield schools, attended Springfield schools in the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
I think I need to thank officially Mike O'Brien because he posted about your high school years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was a trip. I've forgotten a lot of that stuff, as a matter of fact.
So I cribbed a lot from Mike's investigative reporting. So you graduated from high school in 69?
Yeah, I graduated in 1969. I went to Campbell Elementary School, Boyd Elementary, Pipkin Middle School, back then it was junior high,
Right.
and Central, and then went across the street to Drury University.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I should know more than I do, but so when did desegregation come to Springfield? 54?
Actually, it was 54. The Brown versus Topeka Board of Education decision, I think some of the language in there was that they were to integrate without deliberate speed. Springfield did integrate as far as students were concerned.
Yeah.
They did not take very few black teachers were integrated into the public school system here. But the schools actually integrated, immediately. Yeah. Wasn't like Little Rock or some of the other places.
Yeah.
But like I said, they did not take the teachers, counselors, and things with them when the integration occurred.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting to me as I reflect upon that. But that's
So if you were born in 50, you would have been one of the first cohorts to go through the.
That now they have preschool that you can go to, but I wouldn't have been able to go to preschool with white students, up until the time, because I was at 4 when they integrated the school districts. But I went to Central in 1965, so it had to be, I guess that's elementary school. In December, they would hold you back a year, so,
Right.
so when I probably started in 1958, going to school, 57, 58.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
You don't remember much
No,
about it.
no.
So, did you have a sense then, when I think back to my grade school years, I didn't know anything that was going on pretty much, but did you have a sense of the climate in Springfield at that time?
Well, yeah. I experienced the climate in Springfield. I remember growing up over on the north side of town. First, I was in Southtown, which is now Grant and Grand, out there by Fast Night Park and Parkview.
Yeah.
That we called it Southtown.
Southtown.
And there was a passive park there, and we'd all play in the park. But as that's when I went to Campbell Elementary, and then we moved, and I went to Boyd. And I think it was probably during my Boyd years that I sort of the sense, black people were treated differently. I remember even, go walking to school to Pipkin one morning, people driving by and calling you the N word. And I remember having very low self-esteem during that period of time because it was a negative environment for us. But then in 1965, there was a Baptist minister. His name was Reverend William E. Pitts, and a professor from Missouri State, I believe it was a history professor, Anderson McCullough, and he was a paraplegic. He was disabled, but they organized the young people in our community into the NAACP Youth Council. And there had been NAACP Youth Councils before, but there never was sort of a continuous sort of effort, ebbed and flowed with whoever the leadership was of this voluntary civil rights organization. But these gentlemen organized us as teenagers, freshman year in high school, and I might add, I only had one African American teacher my entire public school career. So from first grade to graduation, I had one African American teacher, and that man's name was John B. Hughes. He lived over on Rogers Street. I grew up with his son Victor and his daughter Rowena, and he was a shop teacher. But he was also at one time the president of the NAACP, so pretty actively involved in Washington Avenue Baptist Church.
And there's an apartment complex.
Yeah, that was named after him because of his work in the community, his civic engagement, things of that nature.
And also just trying to connect the dots, is Pitts Chapel named after Pitts? Or?
No. He was the pastor at Washington Avenue Baptist Church, and that's where I was baptized, grew up in the church, singing in the choir. The Washington Avenue Baptist Church now is Turning Point. It's over on National Avenue, but there was 4 churches within a 2-block area, and they called it the Church Quad. Pitts Chapel, Gibson Chapel was Presbyterian, Pitts Chapel, and then Benton AME Church up on the corner of Central and Benton. And then Washington Avenue was I guess there's where Drury College is.
I've been in that one.
It's the diversity center is there. Now, that old church. They tore that church down brick by brick and then rebuilt it brick by brick.
Oh, really?
And now it's their diversity center in Drury.
So of those 4, how many? I know we lost one just in high school days.
Gibson Chapel. It was basically torn down because it was such disrepair. And they're going, and I think they attend church as another church somewhere.
So just, black churches in the Ozarks is a topic of interest to me. So there were 4.
There were 4. The tremendous engagement with the black churches, and even the different black churches, would socialize together, would commune together, celebrate each other's historical birthdays and things of that nature. Very active Bible schools during the summertime. I can remember being in Bible school during the summertime. Active youth choirs and things of that nature.
Wednesday evenings. Your
churches Wednesday evenings.
You're going to church for some reason.
Bible study. So, but it was just a very engaged community, and of course, Reverend Brown of the Brown versus Topeka Board of Education decision was a pastor at Benton AME Church for a couple of years before his unfortunate demise.
Did Ashgrove have a black church?
I believe so.
I guess the question, I'll phrase it as a question, a broader question. I know I haven't been down there yet, but there's an African American church in Fayetteville, Arkansas, that I think was started in 1865.
Is that right?
It's still in existence.
Wow. I think there was a black church in Ashgrove. Father Mosley is affiliated. They have like a museum down there too.
I know. I've been to the museum.
It's been years since I've been there.
Well, the museum on Main Street closed, but he still has the stuff. But I don't know what he's doing with it. I don't know how his health is. I heard his health was...
It was interesting because when I moved back to Springfield in 2007, I lived in California and lived in Maryland, but I moved back in 2007. And shortly after I moved back, that is when they dedicated a black cemetery over in Willard. And the first one of the first homesteaders was a slave master by the name of John Looney, and he had brought slaves from Kentucky. And Father Mosley was a part of the program, but they dedicated the farm as a historical burial site in the cemetery. Well, of course, the cemetery had, the slave master's grave, but then they just had these stones.
Yeah.
And the slaves, of course, were named after the slave master.
Right.
Well, my first wife, her last name was Looney, and so I found out that my children, 3 of my children, were the descendants of the first slaves in Greene County.
Really?
And it's through that John Looney,
Really?
who was from Kentucky, slave owner from Kentucky.
Yeah.
And when they moved, homesteaded here in Springfield, and I didn't know that until 2010, when they dedicated the site.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was the first time that the white Loonies from the white family got together, and the black Loonies, who were the slave descendants, actually were part of the celebration they had commemorating that.
Just in the past month. So the Weaver family down in north of Ozark, they also were slaveholders. And there's a Weaver cemetery. So Weaver Brothers in Elvira, the first very popular vaudeville show that came out of Ozark.
Well, I'm probably kin to the Weavers because my father's name was Glenn Weaver.
Really?
My biological father was Glenn Weaver.
So there's a Weaver cemetery north of Ozark. And I haven't, Leon, who was part of the Weaver Brothers in Elvira, he's buried there. He died in 50, I think. But I've heard that it was the same kind of deal.
Yeah.
So the slaves took the Weaver last name or gave them the Weaver last name.
Yeah.
And some of them are buried in that cemetery.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the interesting things about all, and that's one of the things I want to do is, for my family particularly, because, my father was a Weaver, then my stepfather was a Pratt, and then there's the Looney clan, who's, I mentioned. But that's one of the things I want to do is do the research and sort of track my family history, our family history, back through the ages. But I understand that we're related to the Weavers from that particular area.
I mean, they were a pretty prominent family. In the day, so.
And I told the story. My mother was born in West Plains.
Really?
Yeah. And so it just so happened when I made the announcement about the fact that I was going to retire, that was the last Board of Governors meeting, and President Smart wanted me to, to mention it. So I tied that all together because actually if my mother wouldn't have been born, then I wouldn't have been born. And so my entire career probably in public service started when I was born, when she was born in West Plains. But there was a one-room schoolhouse there. It's now a little community center, I believe, and that's where my mother went to school. And it was a one-room schoolhouse for black students in the first grade through the 12th grade.
Yeah.
Ivory Crockett, who works at West Plains, Missouri State University, his parents went to that same school.
Really?
And so this was interesting because when I was going to speak to I called Ivory because I couldn't remember the name of the school, and it was like Lincoln School or something like that.
Yeah.
And so when I called him, he told me that he did an op-ed piece on Juneteenth, and he had a picture in the West Plains Quill, and of his parents, his mother or his father, I think, when they were little children at this school in front of the schoolhouse. Yeah. And so I used that in sort of my remarks, but I tied that all together. And then I told the story also because my mother's name, Van Pratt, that's all I was known her name,
Pratt.
Van, V-A-N, Pratt.
Yeah.
But her real name was Bleeka, B-L-E-E-K-A, okay? Now, back in those days when, she was born there, but her mother had passed at a relatively young age, and so she was raised by a great aunt from West Plains. The great aunt changed her name when she was a little girl from Bleeka to Van. And she changed it because it was too African, it was too black for that period of time. Because that had been in 1930. She was born in 1931. So
it was part of that kind of an assimilation era.
Yeah. So she changed her name, but I found out later that Bleeka's name is West African, derived from West Africa, and it means she who brings together. And so when my second daughter was born, I wanted to name her after my mother. I called my mother on the phone and I said, Mom, I want to name her after you, but we had this tradition in my family at that time of naming our kids B's. You know, Brianna, Brian, Brent. That's sort of the tradition. Well, she said, my name is really Bleeka. And I had heard her cousin call her Blinker, but I thought it was a nickname. But her name was Bleeka. And so I named my second daughter Bleeka, who actually graduated from Missouri State. The last year Missouri State was Southwest Missouri State University, You know, so Bleeka Pratt, she now lives in Texas.
So it's a family name.
Yeah, it's a family name. So, but when I was making my statement, talking about my retirement, I used that story, and I got all emotional when I told the story about my daughter being named after my mother, who was born in West Plains, and I could barely get through it. And I didn't see it coming. It just welled up in me, and before I knew it, I'm like, I can't break down and start weeping in front of these people here.
Yeah.
But I got through it. But it was a pretty powerful moment.
I can empathize because when I become emotional, it just surprises me.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I'm tearing up here, choking up. Okay, so lots of questions follow on that. So, in talking to Elaine Grant Estes, so she attended Lincoln High School. And Graham Rib Station was a legendary barbecue place. And they also had some cabins, tourist cabins.
Right.
And it was one of the few places where a black person traveling, whether they came to perform at the Shrine Mosque or just were traveling through, where they could stay. Alberta's Hotel was another one. I've interviewed her, but did an oral history interview with her, but she said it wasn't too bad. Lincoln High School was not a bad school. It was just segregated.
Right. I mean, they had, and Lyle Foster, Dr. Lyle Foster and Dr. Timothy Knapp did research on that period of time. And, they had a marching band. Academically, the students were very brilliant, sharp. They were actively engaged in this community. Herman Boyd was the drum major.
He was in the Philharmonics.
Yeah, and I Eldridge Moss was one of the members. He was my barber when I was growing up.
Yeah, he was a good barber.
And who else was it? Hairston, Chick Hairston. I remember all of them as a kid growing up, But Mr. Brooks, who eventually became a teacher in the public school system, just outstanding folks. I mean, they were leaders in their own right. They simply didn't have some of the opportunities that the rest of the folks in the community had.
Yeah.
But I remember, growing up and them being Decatur, Roberta Bartley. I lived on Sherman Street. Miss Bartley and Miss Decatur lived right down the street.
Yeah.
When Miss Graham's had the barbecue rib place and the motel. I mean, as a kid growing up, I lived on Washington Street, so we were like 2 blocks across. Away from the and my grandfather lived on Washington just before you get to Tampa. And back in the day, there was, that was a very thriving commercial area. And there was a big apartment complex. We called it Rock Castle. But my grandfather had a pool hall in there, and he used to make liquor, make wine or something in the bathtub. And, it was, I don't think he was licensed to have a pool hall there back in the day, but, it was socially, it was a very vibrant commercial little area over there in Tampa and Washington Street and over there where the hotel was.
And we've talked about Bebop Brown before, but I need to learn more about this. But there were a limited number of liquor licenses that you could obtain in Springfield.
Right.
I don't know why, but and so to get one was really, really difficult. And so Mike O'Brien has told the story where Bebop had clubs around, and he evidently he didn't have an official liquor license, but everybody kind of looked the other way,
Yeah. Bebop Brown. I grew up with both his sons, Jairus and Monty. Matter of fact, Monty just passed away probably 6 months ago.
I would like to do something. I started to see what I could find about Bebop Brown. I'd like to, whether it's an Ozarks Watch magazine article or something.
Yeah.
Because I think he's I drove by that mural the other day across from Founders Park, and there's no bebop on there.
No,
And there's also no Slim Wilson
Yeah.
and Speedy Hallworth, which is just like, that's not right.
Yeah.
You know?
Something ain't quite right with that.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I
what
grew
they
up
were-
with all those folks, man. I didn't know, the Dallas Bartley.
Yeah.
I remember Dallas Bartley, the Denzel Washington movie Devil with the Blue Dress.
Yeah.
He played part of the music score was Dallas Bartley, and I remember seeing that, the credits roll up, and I was like, Dallas Bartley. It's like, oh my goodness. So, they had a pretty vibrant music scene back in the day,
Yeah.
when those folks were, living.
So you were born in 50.
Yes, sir.
I'm of course very interested in the Ozark Jubilee. 54 to 60, pretty much, is the span of years for that.
Yeah.
It was for me. It's a very unusual time because there was still that annual blackface thing in the Shrine Mosque.
Yeah.
It was a fundraiser for I forget, not the Shriners, Kiwanis.
Yeah.
It was like an annual thing.
Yes, I was talking to I have a brother by marriage, and we were talking not too long ago about that. He remembered the
That's
blackface.
weird. I mean,
He
pretty
remembered
late
it.
for blackface.
And I think he used to shine shoes when he was a little boy with the Ozark Jubilee because he had a grandfather somewhere who would take him down there. But he was sharing, and I didn't remember it because
You never had
my mom.
memories
No,
of, or it's like,
no.
this is
I
the
mean,
weekend of the blackface thing. And
yeah.
So, we ignored
Later
that.
on, I had heard about it, but yeah.
And Ralph Foster, who started KWTO and was kind of the guy behind the Jubilee, he was known, there's a picture of him in the KWTO dial in blackface.
Yeah.
In the late 40s. But then on the flip side, the Philharmonics performed on the Jubilee real early on when they were still up in Columbia because they couldn't do the up. It wasn't like, we gotta diversify.
Right. Oh no.
They wanted them on
Yeah.
there.
They were good.
They were good.
They were good. They harmonized. I mean, they were good.
I
They
think
were
we have the
very
footage
good.
of the first
Yeah.
time because
Oh,
Red's
is that
introduced
right?
them. We're going to bring out these young men, and
Oh,
they're
that'd be
super,
great.
but they were up in Columbia because they couldn't get an uplink from here, and they didn't realize it's like ABC Network TV had already signed on, and they're like, oh, oops, we can't do this. So they did it from KOMU studios, and so when you see the kinescopes, it's just people standing in the studio like 4 deep. They just stood for the whole show, an hour-long, 90-minute show, and the Philharmonics performed on it.
Yeah.
And then they'd come back quite often. I've heard from other people in other interviews was like, they were often like with the square dancers. They were kind of the lead in, lead out kind of thing. Like, we'd wait for the Philharmonics to sing, and then be like they'd cut to the end credits or something. They couldn't even finish the song.
Right. Right.
So it was an unusual time. You have a blackface event and this quartet quintet on national live television,
Right.
coming from the same place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your high school years. The high school years, I think this is just a given any time, any place.
Yeah.
Those are difficult transition times. You're going through a lot when you're in high school. And what do you remember from your high school days?
Well, like I said, that was when Reverend Pitts and Dr. McCullough organized the young people in our community, and Washington Avenue Baptist Church was sort of like the headquarters for the NAACP, and I just remember we being empowered to I found my voice. I was able to speak and address issues, and I just took to it like a duck to water. I mean, that was the birth of my public service career, and the civil rights movement. Of course, we didn't have CNN, but we had Walter Cronkite, in the evening. So what was going on in Selma and other places, Memphis, hotspots all over the United States, we were seeing it on television. And so when they organized us, we led demonstrations, during the 60s and the early 70s. Actually, there was against Missouri State University. There was an apartment complex right across where that credit union is over there. There was an apartment complex over there, and they didn't have they didn't allow black people to socialize with white folks, or particularly with white girls. So there was a demonstration. I remember there's a picture somewhere of me with the NAACP shirt on. I got a big fro. I've got on sandals and these high water pants for what? And we're having this demonstration coming right across National Avenue and Grand Street. And then also during the early 70s, a friend of mine was murdered by an off-duty police officer. So the whole George Floyd, the whole that's been a part of my existence from the very beginning, and I happened to be in college then, so this is probably been in '71. Michael Dunlap was a young man who had gone into a drugstore. It used to be a drugstore in the corner of Central and what is that street? Central and Benton. There's a little drugstore there, and this off-duty police officer had seen them roll, and he claimed that they were in a car and they rolled through a traffic light, So he goes in, they're in the store, Michael goes about one part of the store. When he comes back, he's got this guy who's got a gun pulled on his friends, no identification as a police officer, he's not dressed as a police officer, so Mike grabs him around from behind, and then the guy identifies himself as a police officer. Mike lets him go, and the guy turns around, and Mike starts to run, and he shoots him in the back and kills him. And Michael grew up less than a half a block from my house. We used to play football in Silver Springs Park. We had like the Turkey Bowl and the Christmas Bowl, and he was a pretty good athlete at Central. He played football there, And I remember going to the inquest, and so I'm listening to the testimony. I'm there, and they come back and they rule it's a justifiable shooting. Really? And then I got it on, and of course, like I said, I'm listening to the testimony, and they, just like I just told you, and they ruled that a justifiable shooting, and in the back, unarmed, in the back, there's no threat of, harm to him or anybody else. But then, there used to be a former police officer who used to be a public official, and I remember not too long ago when I first got back having a conversation with him, and he admitted to me that was a bad shooting, that was an unjustifiable shooting.
How the black community, how the local
community? We were heartbroken. We're heartbroken. You know somebody that you grew up with, and but yeah, no cop got nothing. It was just like, hey, yeah,
when
it was
did
justified.
The police force diversify?
Oh my! The first one was another young man I grew up with. He's a little bit older. His name was Gary Adams. He was the first black police officer. I'm not sure exactly when, but he ended up. His son was Peanut Adams, who was a pretty good athlete. I believe he was a quarterback at Arkansas. Played football at Arkansas. So he would have been the first black police officer. I remember one of the former police chiefs. Oh, and that was also during like I said, the civil rights movement. And so during 1971, there was a demonstration that we had organized. I got some pictures. I'll send you a PowerPoint. I have an old PowerPoint of some pictures from this particular era, and so
can we put it in our archive?
Yeah, sure. And in 1971, talk about music. There was a band here called Kansas City Elite. They were young people who I grew up with, the Bedales, who still Arthur Duncan Trio. Ernie Bedale's a part of that band. Anyway, they started out as a band in high school. There was a guy named Alan Chappell, and he had a brother, and they were like a white rock band. And so there was a dispute, when the black band was going to be playing, the white band members and the white audience sort of walked out on the black band during this period of time, because it was late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
So in 1971, probably the largest direct action demonstration was held at that particular point in time because there was fighting in the schools and white students fighting black students and sorts of discriminatory actions and things like that, disparate punishment of black students versus white students.
Right.
And so there's this large march, and we organized at the Community Youth Center. I got a picture of Reverend Pitts, and there was a white doctor by the name of Dr. Walford Johnson who helped coordinate that. There's a picture of this auditorium full of people of every background and every persuasion, and then there's pictures of the march, and there's, again, it wasn't just a black march, it was white folks, young people, students from Missouri State, back then SMS, students from Drury, parents, and the students walked out of the school at Central at a designated time, had a sit-in out on the campus of the school, then marched to the square. And when they marched to the square, the students from Missouri State marched from Missouri State down to the square, met on the square. And at that time, you had a square that had egress and ingress, going both north and south, east and west.
Right. There's still parking on the square.
Yeah. And so we cut, so you cut out all the traffic going into the square, and then someone tried to drive through, and some other, and I'm one of the leaders in, and my mother is marching with us, and so when these guys try to drive their car through the demonstrators, and the cops run over there, students run over and drop down in front of the car and stuff. And then my mother comes up to me, and I'm leading the march. I got the megaphone, and she's like, "Harold Wesley, it's time to go. Dad, it's time to go," And I was like, Mama, get back in the line, please, get back in the line, And she gets back in the line, but I used to get telephone calls and threats from people,
Really?
Yeah, and I was just a kid,
Yeah.
Like,
You were in college in 71.
This was during high school and college. In 71, I was in college at Drury. And
but you'd get, you just get a call at night, and it'd be
yeah, they'd be threatening me. It's
drop
like,
the
we've been
N-word,
good to you, we've been good to you ends, don't be a smart aleck and mess it up, and you're next, and just
enough's enough.
yeah, but when you're young and empowered, I had no fear. My mother was scared to death, of course, because for most of her life she was a single parent, had been a single parent, so she was. She was very much concerned about,
How many siblings do you
I
have?
have three. We had three immediate siblings, and I had two stepsisters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you the oldest, youngest?
I was the oldest in my
then
family, and
sibling group,
first one to go to college. My brother Henry played football here. He went to the military after he graduated from high school for 4 years, then came back here and played. Yeah, and he even had an interesting story about, because I was a student activist, I was a good student, senior class president.
You were,
Played football, basketball, ran track.
Yeah.
But when I came over, I got invited to come to Missouri State to meet the coach. And the coach's name at that time was Red Cross. Never will forget it. I didn't get a tour of the campus. He met me in the locker room. I didn't even go out of the locker room.
You didn't get
and
out
he
on
told
the
me,
field or
he
anything?
told me, he said, you can try out for the team, and if you make it, we may give you half a scholarship. So I'm a second semester, I'm a senior, and this is what, I'm all conference, all district, honorable mention, all state, and he says, if you try out for the team, may give you half a scholarship. And then there was a teacher, a counselor, her name was Jean Walker at Central. She was sophomore counselor, because my senior counselor wanted to send me to the military, but she got me an academic scholarship to Drury, so it changed the trajectory of my life.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
when
how
I came back to Springfield, got hired at Missouri State, there was an article in the paper. She actually called me up, and I think she's deceased now, but she called me up and congratulated me on coming back home and being hired at Missouri State.
Yeah.
But that woman changed my life.
Yeah.
That's why I think the work that Zora and some of the other folks have done with the promoting equity in higher education in Missouri is so profound.
Yeah.
And when I found out about that, I was like, really? I mean, there's an effort statewide to promote equity in higher education. I was literally amazed. And it was the same thing. I mean, there were a lot of good things going on in Springfield when I came back that I was literally amazed about.
Yeah, I started.
nonprofit engagement, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But,
So you came back in 2007.
Yeah, moved
So
back
when did
in
you leave
2007.
Springfield? When did you leave?
I left in 1976 to go to law school.
76, and you went out in San Diego. Where'd you go?
Yeah, I went to the University of San Diego.
Yeah.
But before that, I ran for city council here.
I read that.
Yeah,
You
I ran
got
for
third
city
place.
council, and I got third place. I lost by 944 votes. And so
There was 2 seats.
Yeah, there was
So
2 seats, and the 2 incumbents. So like 3 people running. So I got.
You lost to the incumbents, which is no shame in that.
But one of the incumbents wasn't running, and his last name was Pratt, John Pratt, as a matter of fact, local attorney here. But it was so it was at that time I decided to go to law school, and this was 70. Yeah, and I got married at 75, and
Now, how did you meet Francine? I mean,
I met Francine in Sacramento.
Okay.
We were both actively involved in the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, and I was the director of the California Conservation Corps. So they're out there fighting that fire in Yosemite now. But it was a program that it was modeled after the old Civilian Conservation Corps.
You were the director of the California Conservation.
Yeah, a statewide director.
Really?
Yeah, first African American.
That's like a big deal.
It was, and of course Jerry Brown started that when
Yeah.
Gray Davis was his chief of staff.
Brown, the father.
No, Jerry Brown.
Oh,
Yeah, the one who ran for president.
yeah.
Yeah, that Jerry Brown started the
Was his
Conservation
father also
Corps.
governor?
Yeah, his father was also Edmund.
Okay. Yeah.
Edmund G.
Edmund,
Brown.
okay.
Yeah. But and so so I decided to go to law school, and because I not to make a lot of money or not to even be a civil rights attorney, I just wanted to be able to know when politicians were lying to me. Because they, I mean,
A lot of attorneys say that really law school teaches you how to think.
It does, and that's why. But when I graduated from law school, I was able to work for the first for the Peter Chacon, who was a state legislator, a state assembly member. That's what they call him, not state representative. Call him a state assembly member. He was the one who actually created the English limited language curriculum and legislation and got that started nationwide, and I worked for him. Then I worked for Leon Williams, who was going to be turning 100 this month. He was the first black city council member appointed in 1969, the same year that I graduated. So I worked for him, became his chief of staff, and eventually ended up running for city council in San Diego, becoming a city council member in San Diego, and the district I represent was larger than the city of Springfield. So, but so anyways, and part of what I did on the city council was establish a local conservation corps, which was a program that, of course, did environmental preservation, painted out graffiti and stuff like that, which was modeled after the California Conservation Corps. Well, since I created that when I was on the city council with the mayor at the time, Mayor O'Connor was the mayor at that time. We created that, and then later on, I practiced law for a while after losing an election when we went to district elections. That's a depressing story, but I won't go into it. But then, and so Gray Davis selected me to be the director of the California Conservation Corps.
Wow.
So, and then of course Schwarzenegger came in, and when we had the electricity crisis in California and recalled the governor.
Yeah.
So I ended up losing my position.
Yeah.
And moving to Baltimore, Maryland.
I was going to say, you went to
whole
Maryland.
nother story.
You went to Maryland.
I went to Maryland with the Job Corps. A guy I had hired for a director position at Lake Tahoe was affiliated with the Job Corps in Maryland. And so they hooked me up. I got an opportunity to be a deputy director for the Job Corps in Maryland.
Yeah.
And our students, our young people, came from inner city Baltimore and inner city Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And so same sort of program in a way, career development, career training, but working with a totally different constituency, inner city youth from
How long did you stay out there in Maryland?
I was there from 2005 2004 into 2007,
Okay.
and that's when they started. They wanted to. They were going after another contract. Department of Labor administers the Job Corps program, but it's run by private contractors now. It used to be run by the Department of Labor, but it's administered by the Department of Labor, but private contractors. They were going after the bid, so they're cutting overhead. They wanted to transfer me to Worcester, Massachusetts. I said, now it's time to go back home to Springfield, Missouri. And then that first winter, when I came back, it snowed 10 feet in Worcester in one snowfall. I mean, I was like, if I'd have been in Worcester,
10
Massachusetts,
feet.
it was 10 feet of snow, and it snowed for a week or something like that.
Big old northeaster.
Yeah, it was. I was like, I
Did you? So was it difficult to make the decision to come back to Springfield?
No, because my mother, unfortunately, at the time, my mother was ill. She had been diagnosed with vascular dementia. And she had been at a rehabilitation center for a while. So, I wanted to spend some quality time with her. I actually thought that when I moved back, she'd be able to move in with us. And at the time, I had, Francine and I got married in 2005, so August 5th, 2005, so I got an anniversary coming up. So, so we moved back, but we actually thought that, we'd be able to, but her condition was such that, she needed 24-hour care, and with our jobs and things, there's no way we could do that.
Yeah.
So, but, she lived, normally vascular dementia, you get, 5 to 7 years. She lived for 11 years.
Really?
Yeah. And she passed away in 2014, so.
Yeah. Do you plan to stay in Springfield after you retire?
Yeah. We have grandchildren on the East Coast, and I got a son on the West Coast in San Diego still. My daughter's in Texas. We got a son in Albuquerque. Mm-hmm. So we're sort of situated, right smack dab in the middle. Yeah. And I even brought an RV, a travel trailer initially, and now we got an RV. And Francine grew up with an RV. Her father used to have one, so she gets in that bad boy and she's rolling, man. So yeah.
Price of gas is going down.
Yeah.
But the rate of inflation is what, 8.1%? They just announced this morning, year over year.
Wow. Yeah. So, but I'm not in a hurry to jump on the road. And I like traveling in the fall. I don't really like the summertime, so I like the fall. Fall and spring is my time to travel. But
where in California do you have?
my son's in San Diego.
San Diego.
Yeah. He had been working with ARC of San Diego for years, so he's working with disabled. He sort of has that public service mode, but he's more of a hands-on. I'm more of a policy wonk, more of a social change agent from a public policy perspective. He's more of a, he used to have a business where he made T-shirts and hoodies and created designs and sold them, and then went out and fed the homeless. Yeah. He's more of a hands-on. He's like, he's sort of like an earth child. He's got braids down to here. He's about 6'5", real thin. Loves snowboarding.
Really?
I can't stand the cold, so But yeah, so it's just been an interesting journey in that respect. But like I said, all of it started right here in Springfield, and so whatever I've been, large measures because of my mother, but it's also because of some folks who recognize, and I think that's what's critically important with our particularly underrepresented students, diverse students from whatever background they may come from, to have the opportunity to become educated is critically important. Yeah. And so Missouri State with its public affairs mission, it was just beckoned to me, it just called to me. And then when I got here, of course, they were still trying to figure out what cultural consciousness or competency was, what ethical leadership was, community service, they sort of, community engagement, they sort of had that down. But that ethical leadership gave some folks some challenges, and certainly cultural competency and cultural consciousness. But it's but our efforts here are basically leading the way in this region, if not the state, in that regard. So particularly proud of that.
Cautiously optimistic that the future looks good for?
I I have my moments. I'm gonna be frank with you. I have my moments because, I will reflect on this. My life's journey, and in some ways we're much further along, but in other ways we haven't come as far as we should have, or in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, I think, is a lack of cultural consciousness. It's a lack of awareness. It's a lack of knowledge, and it's a lack of skills development. And of course, in a nation that is so politically divided and polarized, when you have public officials, and that's disheartening to me. You may have heard about my motto, public service is the noblest good. I believe that to the core of my very being. And so when I see particularly elected officials or appointed officials utilizing their office for political gain, whatever that may be defined as, that's disturbing to me personally. Yeah. So that's part of the reason I, didn't continue in sort of elected office, because, I'm not one to, I will tell you what I'm thinking and why I made the decision I've made it.
You have candor.
Yeah. I think I have some integrity, and I'll tell you why I made it, but I'm not going to play the games that I think that people play. And there's not a place for folks who are genuine, who are real, and so unfortunately it's become such a, it's just a game now. Yeah. And to the detriment of our citizens and residents. That's what's disheartening to me. Yeah. You look at January 6th, you look at just the campaigns that are being run now, the misinformation, disinformation, and we should be leading people. We should be, empowering people, doing what's in the best interest of the nation and our citizens and residents, and it's all about political gamesmanship, and that's unfortunate. And so you don't get good people who really want to be engaged in the process. And 15% of the folks participating in the last local election here, the city school board election, 15% of the, so that other 85% of the electorate didn't even engage.
Didn't even bother.
And that's disheartening. And so when young people look at that, and then folks are like, well, you can't change. Well, you can change the system, but you have to engage it. Yeah. But it's so from my own personal, professional perspective, I'll continue to do public service, but I got to be, able to do me. I can't simply, play a partisan game with folks. And at the stage of the game, I told President Smart, I don't tolerate fools well. At this stage, senior citizenship allows you to, even be a little more direct. It's like, I can't do that. I can't do that. But I really, Missouri State. I don't think I would have worked anyplace else when I came back home. Missouri State, when I saw how they had addressed the issue of diversity, I was intrigued from the get-go. And then, we teach our students also about relationships, okay? Mm-hmm. And it just so happens, Ed Chapin is an attorney in San Diego. When I ran for office in San Diego, we had a ballot signature requirement. And his law firm represented me because it was 200 signatures, valid signatures had to be. I got 176 because I represented a district where a lot of people moved all the time. Yeah. So we didn't turn in enough signatures, 176. We filed a lawsuit to get back on the ballot. And Ed Chapin, I believe is from West Plains. This is amazing. I hadn't even thought about it, but Ed Chapin is from West Plains, was a graduate of Missouri State, prominent attorney in San Diego. His firm represented me. I got back on the ballot because the judge said I had substantially complied with the ballot requirement because there's a constitutional right to participate in the political process. Mm-hmm. So I got back on the ballot and won the election, okay? Now, and one of the other interesting things about all of that too, as a student back in the early 70s, we lobbied for the right to vote at 18. I got a picture of me and Thomas Eagleton in his office, along with some other members of the NAACP Youth Council at that time in college. I'd been in 71, I believe. And I think the 26th Amendment was passed in 76. I'm not sure. But anyway, long story short, so we were lobbying for the right to vote at 18. That constitutional amendment passed, the amendment passed, and now youngsters can vote at 18, And so it's been a heck of an interesting journey.
Yeah.
But all things lead back to West Plains. I mean, it's like, really? Really?
Yeah.
You know. So Ed Chapin, and when I met
links.
with Mike Nitzel, when I first, he wanted to meet with me and see if I was interested in working at Missouri State. And he showed me a picture of Ed Chapin on this alumni paper, the foundation publication they put out monthly, right? And there was Ed Chapin. He said, "Do you know this guy?" You know, I said, "Yeah, this is Ed Chapin, prominent attorney." He said, "Yeah, he's an alumni." I already knew he'd already talked to Ed Chapin, doing his due diligence about who I was, and because when I first came back here, nobody knew I was from Springfield. So
Really?
when I'd go to city council meetings or school board meetings, folks were like, "Oh, what's he doing here?" 'Cause
I think I heard, I've only been here 10 years, but I think I knew pretty quickly that you were from Springfield. And there's a lot of people that, it doesn't happen much in Fort Dodge, Iowa, but they grow up, they go out and do great things out in the world,
Right,
then they come
right.
back,
Yeah. Well, it was home. It gave me an opportunity to come home, and then my mother, like I said. But then the other side of the coin is, Francine discovered her own voice. She came here, and she was able to make an outstanding contribution to the city and to the state, to the region,
Still
in
is.
her own right. Yeah,
Still is.
in her own right. So that's been particularly gratifying in a way. She became the president of the NAACP. We started with just a community group, the Gathering, and trying to figure out what's going on in Springfield. And so the Gathering, when Francine was facilitating, and so we identified the issues that black people and people from disenfranchised populations and constituents were concerned about: economic development, public education, and housing. And then Francine became the president of the NAACP, revitalized the NAACP. We were able to engage with the public education system. Out of our Economic Development Steering Committee came the Minorities in Business, and so we established, which is now Multicultural Business Association. So, and then Francine able to do the things she's been able to do with the Community Partnership Organization, with MOCAN, it's just been, it's been an interesting journey, and to come back and then still be able to make a contribution. And like I said, to come to Missouri State and to be in a position that I've been in, when as a boy growing up, opportunities for me at Missouri State were almost non-existent, And then when I was discovering my true self, as a football player, I never got that opportunity to play football, although I did play basketball at Drury.
Did you?
I played well. Yeah.
So this has been great. And actually, I was just thinking, some student could take this interview and write a thesis, just kind of follow all of the threads.
When I was in California, a young man I don't think it was a thesis, but he did a paper. I'll send that to you, because he chronicles the march, because the march in Springfield, the activism, things that were going on Missouri State's campus. Oh yeah, and when we did that march, we had another meeting at Missouri State, and and the black students were over in the student union, and it was a tremendous turmoil. And so white students had surrounded the black students in the student union, and they couldn't get out. There was a seat, and of course, I'm at Drury. My friend Randy Balin, who's my brother from another mother, he goes to Missouri State because we all used to party together, socialize together. So we're over here with the students, right? Now, my mother hears about it, I guess, on the news, the local news, but there's a riot at SMS. So this is a true story. So I'm over here at the student union. There used to be now in the front of it, sort of flat. It's ground level. It used to be raised, and so there were thousands of white students. They were pissed off because they had heard that black students had broken into a dorm or something, and so all this madness was going on. I tell you the truth. My mother drove down Bear Park. She came up. She had got a friend of hers to come pick her up with her best friend, Miss Alma Clay. There's a guy named George driving. He used to fish.
Alma
used
Clay?
to sell Alma Clay.
Yeah.
They pulled up out there, white students, axe handles, bats, racing, and black students
Crowbars.
couldn't even get. Cops didn't even show up. The
Really?
police chief, the police headquarters, not that far away over there on Chestnut, right, Jefferson. My mother walks through that crowd of white students who were raising all kind of hell, and walks right through the middle, calling out my name. And my friend Randy Balin, who graduated from here, who's a white dude, grew up over on Mount Vernon Street. She comes up there, comes right through, walked down the sidewalk, comes right up there, pulls us off the stage, and we had to
Not
walk
by the ear.
through.
Please tell me it
We
wasn't by
had
the
to, no, it wasn't by the ear. We had to walk through that crowd. And I mean, my mother sometimes could be quite profane, but she had told me not to come out here. We came out here anyway. She walked right through, and the white students parted like the Red Sea. And then it started sort of sprinkling and raining, and then they just stopped.
Oh, really?
So
she
the whole thing
she
broke
calmed
up.
the sea
It's
of
a true
discord,
story,
right?
man.
Your
It's a
mom
true story.
calmed the sea of discord.
She
right
calmed it. I mean, and she was. We could hear her cussing the block. You could hear her, what, my mom? I told you not to bring your ass up right here. And she walked right through all those students. They just parted. And we had to walk off. And the interesting thing, you got this black mother, and she got her black son and her white son, and they're marching us through there, man. And then the march, to demonstrate all the energy dissipated. They said it was because of the rain, but it's like I beg to differ. And that was a true story. But
Wow.
that was her. I mean, that was.
She sounds like a wonderful.
She was something else. Everybody loved her. But she would hold you accountable. And she had no problem about coming to get you. And I was 2 times to march on the square. That she did go back in line, but when she was marching, came out there, all those students out there, and she walked right down there and snatched us out of there, and it was embarrassing to say the least.
You're a testament to your mother.
I am. I'm blessed.
On that great story, I think we should conclude. So
Thank you so much for your time.
I don't know what happened to me. I was no more interested in local history than any average educated adult until I got down here, and all of a sudden
Really?
I can't get enough of
Well,
it.
it's an interesting story. I mean, when you
It's an
think about
interesting
it.
place.
Yeah, when you think about it,
Even West Plains. I'll throw in West Plains too.
Yeah.
I mean, just the Missouri Ozarks is an interesting place.
Oh, yeah.
Surprising
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Just for good and bad.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thanks
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you.
Take care.
No problem.